Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Well, here we go. It is the 27th day of March, 2025, as we record this. So by the time you hear it, things may have changed. But welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford, and well, I don't know. I just woke up with a crick in my neck because and it's not the way I slept. It's just the head spinning that's been going on. So there will be plenty to talk about on this edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. First up, we've got Kathleen Wynne is here joining us, the former Premier of Ontario. And I didn't know he was an upholsterer, but apparently that's what they think of him in the Ottawa. Yep. Our veteran pollster, John Wright, is here. We'll be joined presently by Tim Hudak, the former leader of the PC party. And our friend Keith Leslie is digging out from a snowstorm down in Antigonish, so is unable to join us today for this week's edition of the podcast. Kathleen Wynne, the Premier of Ontario, says he was surprised by the actions of Donald Trump yesterday. And I put those in italics and air quotes and all of that stuff because I think that Ford genuinely was surprised by the 25% tariff announcement on automobiles. But last week we were saying, it's all been quiet in Washington. That's a good thing. And then out of the blue, here, a hard one right under your chin.
Yeah, and I think the trouble is, Dave, that I think this is what we're in for the next 4 years. I believe that this probably is some kind of reaction to the pain that Trump is feeling around the leak, around the email disclosure of the security issues around the bombings. I think that he is very reactive to what's in the news cycle, and he needed something to demonstrate that he's still in control, that he hasn't lost control of the agenda. So we pay the price for that. But and when Doug Ford says he was surprised, the timing is surprising, and I agree with you. I genuinely think he was taken off guard, taken aback by this announcement. But we kind of have to be prepared every day to be surprised because that's the new norm.
Yeah, it is the new normal, but I think, I used to do a podcast called The Next Normal. So next week there will be another normal, John. That's just the way it's going to go.
Yeah, it is, and it's going to have an impact on the federal campaign, let alone all the provinces, because this is the first time that Mark Carney actually is going to be tested. I mean, we've seen the polls rise to suggest that Mr. Carney and the Liberals are best suited to deal with it. Well, guess what? It's here. And to hear Mr. Carney saying, well, I guess now's the time to get that call with the president to start discussing, it'll be interesting to see whether that call is made or accepted. So it enters right into the midst of an election campaign. We've got a month to go or so, and so the ripple effects will be very significant over the next few days. What happens if Mark Carney can't get that call? What happens if outside of the Premier's meeting there isn't an effective response, especially with Daniel Smith spending time on radio down in the South? It's an interesting time for the volatility of the polls, but also for the future of car manufacturers, that's for sure.
Well, when we look at it from that perspective, I just think it's interesting as well that we've got the Premier being asked about the electricity and the energy issues that he had brought up 2-3 weeks ago, whatever it was, and that sparked the conversation with Lutnick, et cetera, in Washington. But at the same time, and he was quite ready to pull the trigger on that yesterday, saying, I'm going to hang in there, and we're going to have the meeting first with the Prime Minister. And both the Prime Minister and the Premier were toggling back and forth, dropping each other's names yesterday, Kathleen. A little slightly different tone. You didn't hear Ford talk about Trudeau the same way.
No, and I think that, and I've said this before on the pod, I think that the conversation between the officials is an everyday thing. I think they're going back and forth every single day. I think that Ford is, he's been a really important standard bearer, but he also, he also knows now that he needs to work in concert with the other premiers and the prime minister. And I think just because we are in a federal election, and because, in a weird way, because of what Danielle Smith has done, he needs to demonstrate that he can pull people together and that there's a unified response. I think it's a very good thing for the country that the premiers and the prime minister are meeting. I think it's a good thing for Mark Carney to be doing, to be suspending his campaign, to be saying that, he's going to have this meeting. And I think Ford is wise to say that he needs to talk to all of the rest of the premiers and the prime minister before he says exactly what the strategy is. That coordination is so important. That unified front is so important. And, in the face of what is going to happen today, it's even more significant.
Well, I think, and Tim Hudak is joining us. Were you off making sure that just taking account of how many American parts you have in your car? Just we were just saying, Tim, that it was interesting to hear how the tone has changed in Canada among the first ministers. We'll put Danielle Smith aside just for a second. We'll get to that. But the idea that the premier of this province, noting that first he was surprised by what happened yesterday against the backdrop of what seemed to be a fairly productive meeting the last time he was in Washington, and the degree to which he and Carney seemed to be toggling back and forth, supporting one another in the Captain Canada role. They both dropped each other's names a couple of times when they met the media to make sure. And Ford being explicit in saying, I'm not going to do anything until we actually sit down and have a conversation with the prime minister and the first ministers.
Yeah, so what I suspect has been happening, Dave, we had a detente for about 10 days, more than a week. So Premier Ford was the only one who really landed a punch in all of this when he talked about the 25% export tax on electricity to a number of states. That caught the president's attention. Finally, then the premier and Federal Minister LeBlanc had a meeting with Lutnick, and then things went quiet. So meetings were actually happening behind the scenes to try to work towards an agreement. And April 2nd was supposed to be the deadline for what we would hope, a more thoughtful, comprehensive, and clear American trade policy when it comes to tariffs. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, President Trump makes the announcement on autos, which tells me that people didn't see that coming. It wasn't part of negotiations. I do understand that we had made some progress, that it won't be a 25% tariff if they're American auto parts in that car, and most of them have it. So the effective tariff rate for Canadian cars is actually lower, probably around 12%. However, that's much bigger than the current 2.5. So it looks to me like it went off the rails. As sad, I guess, I got my hopes up. This is simply going to be the reality working with President Trump, that this roller coaster continues.
And John, the interesting thing is the second part of the quote from Ford yesterday, after saying, I don't want to hurt other provinces, but he said, I am prepared to inflict as much pain on Americans and not inflict pain on Canadians. And all the while, Doug Ford has been very careful about saying this is about the administration, not the American people. And he was close to seething yesterday, I think, when he met the media. He let it out. I mean, he said, we're going to inflict pain on the American population.
Yeah, I'm sure he felt blindsided. I'm sure he felt that there were things going on behind the scenes that were going to reopen the agreement. I mean, there were a couple of things that came out of the announcement yesterday that portended for me that this is a bit of a drawn-out process. Number one, there are parts are exempt, so it's for the time being, it's got a little bit of runway on this. But the other thing was the definition of where a car is made in America. I'm not sure any car is made in America unless it's the last bolt that's put on it and you put a sticker saying made in America. The rest of it is made in other places and shipped back and forth with the with different car parts. I'm not sure how all of that will happen, but I do know is this. Canada will have to calculate its response in a very careful way, because this is just the first wave. Remember that other tariffs are headed towards the forestry industry and other sectors of the economy coming up. So, the timing of what you do and how you do it is important. There's also, if there are discussions behind the scenes, there's some runway to continue those discussions until April the 2nd to see what modifications can be made. But thirdly, we finally get a chance for the Americans to respond to something that's going to affect their own workers. Within the next 2 weeks, the impact on the automobile sector in the United States may be very significant. There may be layoffs. On this particular measure, there may be chance for victory or some kind of victory announced at some point. But, now we're into the game. And as I said, this is where, premiers and the prime minister, you got to put your money where your mouth is. You've said that this would be a response. You said that you would do something. Now, what are you going to do? Because this is the first wave that's come through.
Okay, I know you've got a hard stop here for us, John, in a couple of minutes. Just so before you go, give me, and you and I talked about this yesterday on Politically Speaking, but this wasn't part of the formula as we were talking. We anticipated that Trump was going to make the comment. Where do you see this changing the landscape significantly or not in the federal campaign?
Well, at a very high level, we know that the Liberals are up. We know that they're there because of the collapse of the NDP vote, which is sitting now somewhere between 7 and 10%. We know that Mark Carney's got very broad shoulders for this particular issue, and it's going to be tested. Now, here we go. So we have a month to go. What I raised yesterday, and I think it's something important for us to keep in mind, the undertow of all of this is actually the impact on pocketbooks. And the question I raised yesterday is whether or not we see people supporting the Liberals until they don't, and they switch without actually, showing up in the polls necessarily that they're going to be with Mr. Poilievre. I mean, at the end of the day, this is going to affect families. It's going to affect their pocketbooks. It's going to affect, how they view their own futures. And the question is whether or not now Mr. Carney, who has been anointed as the person to deal with Donald Trump, whether he is seen to do that. And we have a month to go. And he may continue to get the support. But remember, it was like that for Donald Trump in the first in the first term. And yes, we can get into the electoral vote issue and how, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but didn't do the electoral vote. The conservatives in the United States, the Republicans, always underperformed in the polls, but then overperformed in the actual ballot box. And the question is whether or not that happens this time in Canada. So I see Sean Simpson at Ipsos also writing for Global News today, a very similar thing that they're seeing in their polls. So I don't rule out that now is the time for the test. And what's delicate for the next few days for Mr. Carney is how does he respond to this? Does he get the call? Does he get a meeting? Does he have any particular impact on this? It may be, that we've got, a month to go in this campaign and things change back and forth. But this is the first change that we're going to have to deal with, not only as premiers, but also as contenders for the throne.
All right. Well, we'll let you go and get to your appointment. And maybe you and I can chat about this more in the coming days and watch the way the polls play out on Politically Speaking. Thank you, John.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. John Wright is our resident pollster, the founding pollster here on the ledge. Kathleen Wynne, let's pick up on what John was just talking about, because it's interesting to me how I'm hearing that the Poilievre rallies are epic. Like there were reporters that might have been Politico. They were saying there were thousands of people showing up at a couple of the rallies this past week. And it's not reflected in the polling vis-a-vis that level of energy and excitement about the Conservative campaign. So John's suggesting that, there are a few people behind the curtain here as far as who's willing and ready to vote Conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a pollster. I think that there are, Pierre Poilievre has a base of support that is thousands and thousands of people in most provinces. And what it says to me is he's got a good ground game in terms of getting people out to rallies, whether that translates into votes, whether that puts the lie to some of the polling data, who knows? What I do think, and John was alluding to this, he was saying this, that the next few days and Mark Carney's response to what's happening with Trump is going to be very important. Not only does he have to substantially or substantively respond, but he needs to be seen to be strong in the face of this, because everyone who, or many of the people who have gone to Carney over the last couple of weeks have done it because of his credentials on dealing with this exact conflict. And so if that doesn't go well, and I think it will, but if it doesn't, then I think you could see a shift even in the polling numbers. But I'm not, I just don't know. How do we know what we don't know about what the people are saying to the pollsters and what those rallies mean? The numbers in themselves, I think, Dave, don't mean that the polls are wrong, but obviously it shows, it demonstrates the energy that Poilievre's base has maintained.
Yeah, no question, Tim. And I think, as I was hearing it, a lot of people were showing up with the uniform on. They were showing up with the Tory outfits and the branded hats and everything. So to Kathleen's point, a good level of organization to get people out to some of those rallies. But also, these are the true believers as well.
I think Pierre Poilievre has been very effective at motivating votes, of tapping in to not necessarily traditional conservative supporters, but those who just feel they've been left behind, that the government doesn't care about them anymore. And I think that's both economically and on values. So they're going to have a very, hard floor that they won't go beneath. At the same time, Carney has effectively come across so far the credentials of being a statesman, having been in crises and having the gray hair that many Canadians may feel is necessary, during this tumultuous time. This is, I hate to say this because it sounds cynical, but the unfortunate news of President Trump announcing the harsh auto tariffs yesterday, it gives Carney the opportunity to take a play out of Doug Ford's playbook. So to look like the prime minister, to call together his council, to then be on Parliament Hill in the offices of Parliament to show leadership and how he would take on Trump going forward. So I think the momentum we've seen for the Liberals out of the gate will get a boost because of Donald Trump's announcement yesterday.
But well, Tim, Dave, can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
It's not that I'm shilling for the Conservatives, but let me
hold on.
What world are we in?
In this one.
But let me just say this, that I think the risk for Mark Carney is way bigger, Tim. I think that nobody expected that Ford was going to be able to do anything. I mean, that's why I was pretty critical of the kind of photo op performance. He wasn't going to get a meeting with Donald Trump. Nobody expected him to get a meeting with Donald Trump. Nobody expected him to really be able to move the needle on this. I think he probably did more than many people expected him to be able to do. But the bar was low. I think the bar for Mark Carney is much higher, and I think that that's the risk that this whole situation poses. I'd say over the next 3-4 days, that people are going to say, well, we expect that he's going to be able to do something. The other point I wanted to make is that on the rallies and so on, a lot of the vote, as I understand it, that has gone to Carney, most of it has come from the NDP. The NDP vote has collapsed. And so I wouldn't expect that, that base of people who support Poilievre, it hasn't really shifted, but the NDP vote has really shifted. So we'll see what happens to that over the next few days as well.
And so I appreciate, the premier's point. And, I was always more of the optimist. I think Ford was having an effect, started the ball rolling. And certainly when he announced, as I mentioned earlier, the 25% tax on electricity exports as an option, that caught a lot of attention. And, working the governors, and Doug Ford's also been a very, I think, effective voice across American media channels, just because I believe the tone, the way he comes across, a very common touch, will connect well with a lot of Americans watching at home, especially those who may favor President Trump. I think this is, I'll throw this on the stage while we're talking about risks. So one risk I worry about is that Mark Carney might be tempted, the Liberal campaign, really to throw Alberta and Saskatchewan under the bus. Not going to get many votes there anyway. So putting sacrifices on oil and gas by talking about a tax on exports, withholding exports as a bargaining tool, boy, that'll set those two provinces on fire. but would actually, divide this campaign as Trudeau divided the campaign last time around on vaccinations for COVID. It's going to be tempting a Liberal campaign. I just hope they hold off on that, because I think it's going to be very damaging to the country as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm just in general, and we can get into the Danielle Smith thing in a second, but just in general, Kathleen, I don't think there's a whole lot of tolerance among the electorate right now for a lot of bullshit, shall I say, on that level. Like, let's not be playing one against the other. I got my Canada shirt on. You're wearing your red sweater. I mean, the number of people I see, where are you, Tim?
Where's your red tie? Tim, that red tie, where is it?
The number of people I see wearing pins and making a real effort to, express themselves one way or the other. I just don't think people are going to have a lot of tolerance for that.
No, I agree. And I like Tim, I hope that's not where we go. I hope that's not where any of the campaigns go. I think Danielle Smith is doing her own job in terms of dividing the country. I think that the job of the leadership of the country right now is to pull people together. And to the extent that that's possible with every province, I mean, Mark Carney has talked about one economy. He's talked about the country standing together. So I don't think he's going to veer away from that message. And so I don't think he's going to give Alberta or Saskatchewan any fresh ammunition to be divisive. That's my hope, and it's my expectation.
Yeah, and so I think I hear you, Tim, in terms of being a little nervous still, nonetheless, about it, because we know that politically forward, out into the front window is one thing, but your experience with the folks who live in the back room, did one of you talk about nobody have any souls in that room at one point?
It's right, the ends and the means sort of argument, and ultimately, right, those that raise their hand and step forward for any of the four political tribes want to win at the end of the day, and sometimes there'll be pressure from some who say the short-term win is better than the long-term gain. I hope the Premier is right about that we will continue to have a national voice, because, man, there's so much at stake.
But this is where I think, and this is me talking solely my opinion. I do not have visibility into the conversations that are going on in the back room. But I think this is where somebody like Mark Carney, who is a grown-up and he's got such lived experience, and I'm not sure, Tim, that some of the people in the back room are going to sway him in the same way that they might another less seasoned person, and I say person, not politician. For sure, Mark Carney's he's not a politician, but he's got a lot of life experience. And so I just hope he'll be able to stay on that philosophy of we are better if we're operating as one country, because I think that is absolutely true.
And just back on the Premier's point, Dave, on the Democrats and yours as well. Yeah, it kind of, I think that their angle is going to be if either the Liberals take a big lead or the reverse and the Conservatives take a big lead. If it's looking like a horse race, I think that the NDP is in a hell of a spot. What do you do? Well, I still think that they need to attack Carney. He definitely has moved to the right. He's adopted a lot of conservative plans and abandoned some Trudeau-era plans. So a full throttled attack by Jagmeet, that there's conservative and conservative light, I think is his only channel right now.
All right, we're lucky to be able to welcome back in John Wright is here. So why don't we do that? Took care of your appointment, and here he is. So we're back with John Wright and Kathleen Wynne. Yeah, and you're muted, pal. They took whatever appointment you went to. They don't let you talk anymore.
It took away your voice.
It took away my voice. That's rare. That's for sure.
There you go. We were just saying, John, before you jump back in, this idea that the Canadian personality right now is on the one hand, we're all exhausted. I think there's a high level of anxiety just trying to keep up with everything that's going on. But at the same time, we're relatively united, like I've never seen us united before, in terms of a specific cause to stand up against what's going on south of the border. So that whatever Mark Carney may do and the premiers may do, at the risk of making it political. I just don't think that there's a lot of tolerance among Canadians to be having our politicians, our first ministers right now, using it as a political angle to win something or other. And that, in fact, could be the risk that Carney faces in the back rooms with the Liberal campaign. They may be saying, force Alberta to do this, force Saskatchewan to do this, because that's going to get us a win in the short term, and we're going to look like champions.
Well, I caught the discussion you had before I popped back on here, and I think there's a couple of things that I think about. Number one is that you're absolutely right with the unity of the country and banding together behind Mark Carney, as I said earlier, who's seen as the guy who can really manage this file. Even in the province of Quebec, that normally would be sending the bloc out to Ottawa to represent its interests, there, you see the galvanization, which is rare in Quebec, behind the Liberals on the issue of being Canadian. It's kind of in my lifetime, I haven't seen that. But I also reflect on the fact I don't know what the Prime Minister is able to do with someone like Danielle Smith, not so much Scott Moe, but Danielle Smith, who, is going to run her own show. Do you want to make it about a showdown with Alberta, or do you want to just say, that's just her, she's running her own show, she's independent, I wish she was on the team, but we have a bigger fish to fry here? I think, you want to pick a fight with Alberta, it may become the issue of a campaign, and I don't think you want that. So I guess at this stage, it's unfortunate where she's headed. I don't see any other premier really calling her out on it, except that code word of we all stick together rather than fall together. But again, the next week is going to be kind of weird because Mark Carney's going to be tested in so many different ways, and people, because they're voting for him as the Captain Canada, are finally going to get an assessment in mid-campaign whether he can do this or not. I think it's a perilous moment for the Liberals in this campaign.
Well, equally though, Tim, it's perilous for the Conservatives in some respects, because Kathleen Wynne saying, the bar is high right now for Carney's performance, but at the same time, this pretty much shuts Mr. Poilievre out of the news cycle for 5-6 days.
It is definitely, an echo of what happened in the provincial campaign. And whenever President Trump, burst through the door, like some political version of those old Kool-Aid ads, it's a total distraction and an advantage to the leader of the time. This does give Mark Carney an opportunity to look the role of Prime Minister, to give people a preview for how he would deal with Trump if successfully elected at the end of April. And a test that I'm sure they'll say publicly they wish they didn't have to perform. But I bet, the campaign is relishing this moment. And it is awfully difficult to cut in and get in on that stage when this scene occurs, as was witnessed in the Ontario campaign, where Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles could not really get a word in edgewise.
So let me ask you, Tim, based on the conversation that we sort of alluded to already vis-a-vis Danielle Smith, the Premier in Alberta, at what point does the Tory campaign say, could we have a chat here just for a second? just for a second?
You don't think they've already done that?
Well, it doesn't sound like it's having any effect.
I'm sure Kathleen has her versions, right? When you're leader, it can't be like with friends like these. I don't need any enemies.
Me and the unions.
there you go, right? Every party's gonna have their versions of people who try to be helpful. I don't get it. I think the Premier's right. They probably have had that talking to, and I'm sure it has happened again. And it's funny, people through time. I've got a soft spot for Danielle Smith. We sort of climbed the ladder together. We were opposition leaders at one point in time. And so I've known her for quite some time. I just wonder if there's something there too. I get it, right? For as Alberta Premier has got to defend against any kind of repeat of the Energy Act that, really robbed Alberta of jobs and wealth, the Canadian Energy Program, National Energy Program, my apologies. But there's also going to be something, I think, tempting about the bright lights of being on the American stage, on being on shows that, your followers, your people who support your campaign enjoy watching. So sometimes there's a chance to stay on that stage and keep an open mic a little too long because it feels good, but it's damaging back home.
Yeah, but Kathleen, the problem here for me is just the premier in Alberta, Smith, has actually amped up the rhetoric. I mean, just it's going right through the roof and talks about, how she's being treasonous and all, and, their accusations. I mean, I'm paying attention, but I'm not hearing that level of that kind of rhetoric, the heat for sure. And then to be going down and, joining Shapiro on, the stage for a fundraiser. Wow. Okay. I could just see the Liberals in the back room are just, okay, we'll cut that clip. We'll cut that clip. There's our ad campaign for the next 3 weeks.
But I'm not sure, given her kind of erratic, self-involved kind of behavior, I'm not sure that Pierre Poilievre has any control over what she's doing. I'm not sure that she's listening to him or anybody else. I mean, after all, he's vying for being the prime minister of the country. Well, Ottawa is no friend of Alberta. I mean, that is kind of the fundamental of her argument. So I'm not sure he's got any control. I think that obviously, if I were him, I'd be trying, because she's not being helpful in any way. But in terms of the Liberal campaign, I think that to what John was saying earlier, I think it just has to be staying on the unity message that and she needs to be marginalized to whatever degree possible, and that it not become a distraction. I mean, Mark Carney fighting with Danielle Smith is not going to be productive in any way. And Pierre Poilievre, if he can get her to be quiet, that would be good. I think that's good for the country, but I'm not sure she's going to listen.
We also have to remember, Dave, that she's also involved in a scandal out there that's, in terms of Alberta Health Services and the involvement in the contracts. Maybe, part of this motivation is much the same way as Mr. Trump has with Signal. I mean, the great phrase in politics is, as the two learned politicians would know, and that is change the channel and turn up the volume. That's certainly, we may be at what do they call that, leather at this stage? It's a little high, but it is who she is.
If she needs her own distraction, I think that's true, John. I think that's a good insight. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about, and everybody at some point here has sort of alluded to the collapse of the NDP vote federally, and we watched that happen, and certainly even the Bloc Québécois in Quebec, and then the Liberals are kind of floating to the top. Tim, I heard on the one hand the Conservative, challenge coming into this campaign was that Pierre Poilievre is like the knight who actually killed the dragon in the first scene of the movie, and now there's nothing left to do because he got rid of the carbon tax, he got rid of Trudeau, he got rid of all the things he's been complaining about. At the same time, while I appreciate the fact that it's always good to be in the lead, there seems to be a certain level of, I guess, I don't know even if it's nervousness that I hear from Liberals about looking at the polls, as good as they are for them right now.
For sure, right? I mean, we have over a month to go, which is longer than the entire provincial writ period left ahead of us. Right? The first period isn't even over as of yet. Was it Disraeli? Who was it that talked about what he feared the most was events, dear boy, events? Same goes for Poilievre, right? The thing was in the bag until this orange guy down south, right, shook everything up. Just back to the New Democrats, too. It's a bit of sowing, reaping what you sowed as well. The sort of the lackluster leadership, propping Liberals up for far too long, not being clear enough, where you stood, or rallying around a clear cause. So for sure, there are some progressives voting on the Liberal side. John and Kathleen have talked about that. But I also think that deterioration was well underway, well before the writ dropped.
Well, just what do you make then of Tom Mulcair, Kathleen, just in terms of his assessment? And let's just again state out loud that the National Post completely torqued his blog on ctv.ca. They are saying he was telling the Canadians not to vote for the NDP, period. That's not really what he was saying. He was getting back to more of the point and the observation that given what's going on, there's no way in for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP to engage the electorate in this debate conversation because of Trump.
Well, I don't know if any of you guys heard Tom Mulcair, months ago talking about Carney. He really likes Mark Carney. So there's kind of an initial position that Mulcair holds, that he thinks Carney is a good guy. He's probably the right person for this moment. I'm putting words in his mouth, but I definitely heard that positive message, and I don't think there's any love lost between him and Jagmeet Singh. And I think that I don't think that any of the strategy that Jagmeet Singh has used over the last couple of years is anything that Tom Mulcair has a lot of respect for. So it doesn't surprise me, and I think it's part of this thing that's happening, which is progressives are saying, we really do not want to see Pierre Poilievre elected, and Mark Carney is presenting an alternative that is, now that Trudeau's gone, that is what we have been looking for. So I think that's what's going on, and I think he's reflecting that.
Yeah, John, you and I chatted about this earlier in the week, but the idea that this being a two-horse race, party, Liberals and Conservatives, does that sharpen the focus of the voters, or does that actually sort of dull it in terms of, okay, well, this is over almost? I mean, there will be a certain constituency that will say, okay, I guess the Liberals are going to win this one. Doesn't matter. There's a month to go.
No, we have a month to go. I mean, what we have right now, the ballot question is who's best to take on Donald Trump. I don't know how you can sustain that. In Ontario, it was a little bit different. You're starting from a very firm position that's being telegraphed. And the other two parties just weren't up for it. I don't know how this is going to end, but what I do know is when I watched the three party leaders, major party leaders, start off, two of them were very clear on what they wanted to do, whereas the NDP demonstrated to me that they're just not in the game from a communications point of view coming out of the gate. I mean, the first part of what Jagmeet Singh talked about was, hey, folks, you needed to go to the polls and thank me with your vote for getting me what I got for you. And it was like, okay, I didn't have that on my script this morning, because I thought on my script you'd be first out of the gate saying, look, we're going to have the imposition of tariffs, and when they come on cars, I'm there for our people and our unions to make sure that we fight for them, and whether they're in the forestry union or the Boilermaker union or whatever, well, I guess the Conservatives got them now. But the reality is that I thought that they'd come out strong, talking about the actual threat that there was, and that didn't happen until the second part of it. And then the third part was the table issues that we all deal with. What did we see in the last 24 hours? Well, first of all, they were on the we're going to cut taxes, and the second thing was we're going to be with housing, but that's what everybody else was talking about. So I'm not sure that the campaign for the NDP is well defined, and I just find it relatively weak at this stage. But yeah, the public is divided on who the major players are going to be to handle what's south of the border. But that's today. I don't know where we're going to be 30 days from now because of the volatility of the race.
So, Tim, we sort of made this complaint in the provincial election here in Ontario. Did you not see this coming? I mean, everybody knew that there was going to be an election in Ontario, even though it was early. This is the election year in Ottawa. I mean, admittedly, the campaign is earlier than the actual official date. But it seems to me, to John's point, the NDP just were not prepared, period, in terms of how to come out of the gate or how to work their way into this conversation. They had more runway than Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles did.
I don't have an answer for that. You're absolutely right. It's incredulous when you just saw the preview in the Ontario provincial election campaign, when you knew you had to differentiate yourself, you knew what was at risk. I think just as a reflection of the leader and those who are in key positions that have regularly, failed New Democrat voters. I think, my grandfather would be just beside himself. There would be a much stronger tone that my grandfather always had of anti-Americanism, of doing more ourselves, a greater role of intervention in the economy to create new industries, and a full-out attack on the other two of being in the pockets of business, and then the structure in place for your candidates. It seems like none of that is there. So you get the fate that you ask for, I suppose. want to make one more point, though, John. Sorry, Dave, if I could. One key difference, though, we've had a lot of parallels to the provincial campaign of last month. One key difference, though, is when we at Council Public Affairs did our polling, we found that the Ford Conservatives were underwater on every issue: healthcare, education, cost of living. They dominated on who can stand up to Trump and handle, the turbulent times ahead. But at the same time, neither Marit Stiles or Bonnie Crombie was seen as a better alternative. If it was anybody, it was none of the above. I suspect here that a lot of voters do see Pierre Poilievre as a better alternative on federal issues around the cost of living, right-sizing government, I would think, on the economy. So that is an area where there is an alternative who is credible, where in provincial campaign, the two opposition leaders just had not hit that bar yet of ready to lead.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there are two things I want to say about this as well. I think that Jagmeet Singh, the NDP, I believe, felt that there was a way for them to get credit for things like dental care and pharma that just has not happened, and I mean, listen to some of the backroom people I've worked with, and they will say government's always going to get credit for what government does, not for who pushed, the people who pushed them there are not necessarily going to get the credit. But I think the NDP believed that because the pharma and dental were so clearly things that the Liberals were not going to do, and then they did because of the NDP, I think they thought that was going to break through, and it hasn't. So I think that's a big problem for them. And I think it has muddied their message because they haven't moved away from that. The second thing I think, and this happened in the province as well, the loyalty of private sector unions being lost to the NDP in some way, going to the Conservatives, I think that's a really difficult conundrum for them to deal with right now, and I think into the future, because that lunchbox worker sensibility is not necessarily with the NDP provincially or federally now, and I think that's a big loss to them. So I think those are two factors that Jagmeet Singh has not been able to sort out.
Yeah, that union issue, John, is an interesting one to see develop, and it's relatively new. I mean, in terms of that shift. I mean, even yesterday, when we had Carney in Windsor in front of the Ambassador Bridge making his announcement about a $2 billion support program for auto workers, all the Unifor folks were behind him. That would have been that would have been NDP territory. Windsor, auto workers, all of that thing. That ground is completely shifted.
Yeah, and again, for Pierre Poilievre, I think it was the Boilermakers that were with him the other day, and we saw it effectively used during the provincial campaign and the courting that's taken place there. I think when it comes to the ballot questions that's on the table, the two major parties have the best advantage in terms of, one is either going to be conservative, the other is going to be liberal, and then, the NDP are like the little brother. They've come along for the ride, but they're not going to be on stage. I also wonder whether tactically within his own party, Jagmeet Singh has spent too much time in Ottawa. I mean, it was the case in the last federal election campaign, that they really had a great air campaign, but they didn't have boots on the ground. We saw that. They didn't have the funding. They didn't have a whole lot of things that actually get the vote out. I think, again, by focusing in on the way that they have and not keeping up with the ballot question and not even having the positioning for the ballot question as it stands now, I would have even thought about having a slogan about Canada unified, you know what I mean? Like a union in the word or something like that. There's no thought to this whatsoever. So at 7% in the polls, down from what started at about 21% and hovered around 17%, they're down 10 points. They're not going to pick up anything in Quebec that they would have even hoped for during an election campaign. And they're down right across the country in every other place. The only thing I can think of is what Tim said, I think, last week, and that was, at some point people may say, who in the unions, say at the end, if the Liberals are leading by a certain amount, they kind of go, well, I'm going to go back and park my vote over here because I don't need to give it all to the Liberals. And that's a strategic vote. But I don't know how they're going to be able to get their footing, because it just seems their campaign is very generic at the moment.
So given that, and I posed this question on the roundtable on John Moore's show earlier this week, the Liberals have a new leader, period. What are the odds that the NDP and the Tories risk having a new leader by the end of this calendar year? And I say that because even if Poilievre, Tim, wins a minority government, the parliament could still and would likely still be controlled by the NDP and the Liberals, depending on the vote spread. But if it's a minority, it's a minority. And knowing the track record of the federal caucus for the Conservatives, I don't think there's a lot of tolerance there for a guy who doesn't deliver.
I'm on the other side on that one. So, and I'm not a New Democrat, and I don't always understand the chemistry in the creature, but I have to think that Jagmeet Singh will no longer be the leader in this after this campaign. I just cannot see that
completely. I agree with that.
On the other
what
hand,
I'm getting at is the Poilievre issue. If he only wins a minority, that's
sure.
not good enough. He's got to win a majority going away.
Yeah, I sharply disagree. I really do. He has been a strong, effective, well-organized, spirited, an excellent communicator. He's also a strong leader that has ensured that he has, support right across the party apparatus to defend any kind of leadership review. And he's aligned himself, I think, in the right spot on the conservative spectrum. I think if they blow this, they'll be held to pay for those who are involved in the campaign. But I'd be willing to bet you $1 for donuts or what have you, Dave. If he doesn't win, I still think that's a possibility he can. If he doesn't win, for sure he stays on.
Yeah, I'd chime in on that too. I think if you reflect on where Harper was, he won a minority the first time. I mean, it wasn't a full majority. In fact, he lost his majority bid the weekend before the vote was actually taken. And he did that by saying he was going to win a majority, if I recall correctly. But I would agree with Tim. The alliance is probably going to be with the Bloc. I mean, that would be enough to kind of move Parliament forward. But I don't think he would be going anywhere. I think, the Saturday Night Massacre is going to be in open season for Jagmeet Singh. The NDP are going to have to change. That's for sure.
Kathleen?
I mean, if he wins a minority, I'm with Tim. I can't see him going anywhere, nor can I see the party plunging themselves into a leadership race. Like, why? That would not be, I don't think that'd be smart. I think better to continue to fight it out in Parliament one way or the other. I just don't see it. If he loses badly, though, and if there's a consensus that's built that it's because people just don't like this guy, and I think I've heard pollsters say that's part of what's going on with Poilievre. People just don't like him, and the more they get to know him, the less they like him. So if that's the reality and he loses, I think he probably, he may choose to go, quite frankly.
Well, let's us choose to go, and there will be plenty to move around the chessboard between now and the next time we sit down. And just, you never know. We may have to have an emergency session. So if need be,
the bells will ring. That's the mantra. You never know.
You never know. All right. Well, thanks to Kathleen Wynne, Tim Hudak, John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford, and a shout out to our buddy Keith Leslie, who was digging himself out from what sounds like an epic snow event in Antigonish this weekend. So Keith will be back, we hope, with us next weekend. So that'll do it for On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. And just a note, we've also got Politically Speaking in the Now and Next feed, and that's where it's just focusing on the general politics of the day. And we're having a good time with that. So you can find that on the YouTube channel if you are listening on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, etc. You can listen wherever you listen to it, but in the YouTube channel you get both shows. So you can find me on YouTube, just subscribe to the channel, and we're all good. If you're watching on YouTube right now, subscribe to the channel, and this will just drop in to your email with a notification. You won't miss a thing. And I'm telling you, we record this on Thursday, March the 7th. As we sign off, it's 15 minutes ahead of 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Things may have changed by the time you see or hear this. Have a good weekend.
I have a YouTube channel right here, as you can all people see. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. Look at this. Bye now.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.